Well, part two in one day, huh? That feels a little weird, honestly. I don't think I've ever posted two videos in one day that weren't short form content, so this should be interesting. So, for those who don't know the background context, hi, Micah McCamey, host of Titans Rundown. How you doing? But also, did a poll on Instagram, Twitter/X, and YouTube basically asking, would y'all be interested in me doing a weekly video series every Friday until a new Titans head coach gets hired on every head coaching profile for the guys that are considered to be top dogs in this next coaching cycle? And, well, the polls aren't closed yet, but so far 100% of y'all have said yes, do that. So that's why I'm recording this right now. But again, this is something that I find kind of fun. And this is also coinciding with the articles that I'm writing for MCM Music City Miracles. And I'll leave a link to my stuff over there down in the description of this video. So anyway, yeah, let's get right on into this. So we are going over the head coaching profile of offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks, Klint Kubiak. So here's the thing. I do also want to give some more background information. The only reason I'm doing two of these today is because of the fact that I already did a head coaching profile on Chris Shula, the defensive coordinator for the Rams, in article form last week, but I also did one for Klint Kubiak this week, so I decided to do both of them today, so that way I wouldn't be behind or I would never get a Chris Shula one out, right? So, about Klint Kubiak, he again is another high riser in the head coaching search for teams across the league. Giants fans are foaming at the mouth for him. Heck, I've even seen some Steelers fans really want to get rid of Tomlin or mutually part ways and then end up hiring him. You know, they want all of this, right? A lot of people want Klint Kubiak. And I want to start out with this. This is my golden boy. This is my baby boy right here. Klint Kubiak is a dude that I called since like week 2, week 3-ish. Like, I've been interested since week 1, but at about week 2 or week 3, I was really becoming high on some Klint Kubiak, right? And I remember even being extra sold whenever I talked with two Seahawks friends of mine, fans of the team that is, and they were both really just kind and loving about how good Klint Kubiak was. And they've continued to give him that same praise as the season has gone on. So that really helped me realize, hey, this guy is flying under the radar. He needs to be in these talks for head coaching candidacies. So, well, I kept on talking about him for a couple of weeks, and here we are right now where Klint Kubiak is the top head coaching candidate. That should tell you about my taste in head coaches. Don't ask who I had ranked number 2 for the longest time, or heck, don't even ask who I had ranked as my favorite Titans head coaching candidate the last time that we did this. Spoiler alert, it was the guy that we hired. And, well, obviously that didn't go well. So, anyway, now that we've gotten into that, now we can get into the head coaching profile of Klint Kubiak. Starting out with, how did we get here? Where did Klint Kubiak start? And where is he now? Well, I think most people know where he is now. But let's go with how he started. This is a lot longer than Chris Shula's thing, because while Chris Shula stayed at the same place for nearly a decade building up his coaching resume in one specific building, Klint Kubiak went a lot of places before he found home in Seattle. So let's talk about this. Okay, so he starts out as an offensive quality control coach for A&M, and then he ends up being a grad assistant. Like, you know, there's not really that much to talk about with those, right? Again, I said this in the last episode, glorified internships are really what these are. Nothing else that is really happening. So after his time at Texas A&M, though, as an offensive quality control coach and a graduate assistant, he gets called up by the Minnesota Vikings. They're like, yo, you want to be our offensive quality control coach? And, well, he accepts. He stays there for a year. And you'd think that he'd stay in the NFL for a little bit, you know, maybe find a place to settle in. No, he actually ends up becoming the wide receivers coach at Kansas for a year, which is honestly the last place I was expecting him to go. He goes there for 1 year in 2015. Don't know that much about that Kansas roster, but all that I've heard is that 2010s Kansas was terrible, so there's that. But he stays there for 1 year, and then his dad calls him up and is just like, "Hey, son, you want to come be an offensive assistant with me?" And then he goes there. He spends a couple of years with his dad, or he spends a year with his dad, and then the last two with the Broncos still. And then after that, Mike Zimmer notices some of the good work that he's doing in Denver, being, having Trevor Siemian at quarterback and him actually doing some stuff, right? So then he calls him up and is just like, "Hey, are you interested in being the QB coach for me?" And then he was just like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." So then that leads to him becoming the quarterback's coach for the Minnesota Vikings, where he is there for 2019 and 2020. 2019, he's under Kevin Stefanski, who was the offensive coordinator, where they helped Kirk Cousins kind of turn his career around, because at that point he was looking extremely overpaid, but then Stefanski, Kubiak come in and he starts looking a lot better. And then in 2020, they put in Klint Kubiak, who they actually put in Gary Kubiak as the offensive coordinator, back again with his pops as a replacement for Kevin Stefanski, who took a job in Cleveland. This leads to Gary Kubiak staying there for a year, basically kind of pseudo-retiring from the NFL after that year. So in 2021, kind of as a Hail Mary, because Zimmer knew that if his team didn't perform this year, that he was going to get fired, he ends up being the offensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings in 2021. Now, a lot of people were thinking, okay, what's he going to do? Is he going to do something fresh? And truthfully, with the Vikings, and heck, even later on down the line at his other offensive coordinator job, he just kind of used his dad's playbook. That's the truth. I mean, his play calling philosophy was a little different, but it was his dad's playbook whenever you take a look at everything. And I'm not even like schematically genius or anything, but that's just something that I've noticed, and that's what a lot of people say. So he stays there. His offense ranks 12th, which is pretty solid, honestly. And if they were to hire a defensive-minded guy, I wouldn't have been shocked in the slightest if Klint Kubiak ended up staying there for a couple of years, and we're talking about him in the same vein again, maybe even earlier. But since there was a head coach on the way out and an offensive mind came in, there was no room for Klint Kubiak on this coaching staff. So he leaves and then goes to be the passing game coordinator in San Francisco, meeting up with Kyle Shanahan, who is the son of Gary Kubiak's one of his closest friends, and Mike Shanahan, which I find kind of funny that they both ended up meeting up with each other in San Francisco. Anyway, so he stays there for a couple of years, kind of as a reset, because most people were expecting him to get another job at some point. But he goes there. He actually helps Brock Purdy have, I would say, his best season in the NFL while he's there in 2023. And then after that, Saints call him up. Dennis Allen calls him up and is just like, "Yo, you want to be the OC?" As you can tell, there are a lot of these that are hot seat Hail Marys, is what all of these end up being, which I find kind of funny that's what it is Clint Kubiak is a hot seat Hail Mary, except for his job with the Seahawks, but we'll get to that. So he stays there for 1 year. For the first 3 weeks of the season, he was looking like the head coaching candidate. Like, he was looking like he was going to be like the Wonder Boy, give Ben Johnson some competition, for goodness sake. And then his offense just fell apart as the season went on. This is due to injuries and other things, but most people knew that it wasn't his fault. So Dennis Allen gets fired, and Kellen Moore ends up getting hired. Well, hold on. So from what I can tell, it was always the plan to hire an offensive mind in New Orleans, so they didn't feel like they had a need for Klint Kubiak, which then led to Kubiak basically getting fired. And most people knew that this was not his fault. Most people knew that he could bounce back and end up being an offensive coordinator somewhere else, which he did. He goes for multiple interviews, and then the Seahawks call him up and are just like, "Hey, you want to be the offensive coordinator here?" And then he was just like, "Yeah, sure." So that leads to him getting the offensive coordinator job in Seattle, where I want to say this, I was pretty excited for Seahawks fans, because I felt like that he had just gotten the short end of the stick in New Orleans, and I felt like that he had a good chance to do something with the Seahawks, which obviously he's crushed it, and now he's a head coaching candidate this year. So, golly, again, that is a really long profile, because he just did a lot of stuff, right? Like, he was all over the place for a while. So now we can get into what are the positives of him as the head coach. What are some of the negatives? that is what we're going to get into right now. Starting out with the positives, I think that he runs a timeless offense. I think that the Mike Shanahan, Gary Kubiak type of West Coast, whenever it's given to the right guy, is absolutely amazing, and it does so much for an NFL team. And again, it's just timeless. I don't know how else to describe it. You see coaches across the league still using it. Mike Shanahan's son, Kyle, is using it. Klint Kubiak is using it as an offensive coordinator, but I'm going for head coaching examples here. Sean McVay was under the Shanahan tree, which makes me think that his offense was in some ways inspired by that. You also take a look at Matt LaFleur. He also did that. Basically, all the Four Stooges from that time in Washington, Mike McDaniel even. And here's the thing. I actually think that his schemes are pretty brilliant. It's just that he's not the best leader in the locker room. So there's that. Anyway, that's the first big thing is his timeless offense. But then also, he loves using his best players, which that sounds, well, okay, hold on. He loves using his best players. If you have a really good receiver on your roster, he is going to spam them. He's kind of the anti-Arthur Smith in that way, where Arthur Smith just refused to use his best offensive players. This dude will use them any chance he gets, okay? You take a look at the players that he's had. Whenever he had Justin Jefferson, force-fed him the ball. Now, obviously, Justin Jefferson is an absolute beast, and he was probably going to get the ball anyway, but he was still a really solid, but he still ended up taking a second-year leap under Klint Kubiak, which was huge for his development, I guess. But, okay, he was always going to be a beast, but still, that was something to take note of whenever he was the offensive coordinator for the Saints. Alvin Kamara got the ball so much whenever he was there, and, he looked like his prime self again for a year. And this year, he's been okay, but, he has not reached the same heights that he did in that year. I remember always being scared to play whoever had Kamara in fantasy that week just because of how much he was getting the stinking ball. So that was also something to take note of. And in Seattle, he has, I think that's the biggest example. Jackson Smith and Jigba is having a Cooper Kupp type season over there. And yeah, I don't think I need to say anything else. Whenever you're having a Cooper Kupp type season, chances are you're probably getting the ball a pretty decent amount. So here's the thing though, right? Most people would think, oh, this probably gets repetitive and is terrible for the rest of the offense, right? Well, my objection to that is maybe in a way that actually gets his other players more open because everybody is so focused on in Jigba or Jefferson or Kamara that they really guard up on them without realizing, hey, you got a tight end streaking down the sideline, right? Okay, maybe not down the sideline, but down the center of the field that's wide open. You have a receiver running a deep slant that could go for a touchdown, right? They're so focused on stopping one dude that they forget about the rest of the offense, right? So that is just that's probably my favorite thing about him is that he will use his best players. And I think that could come in really big if we were to draft a Jordan Tyson or a Carnell Tate or something like that, get that receiver for him so he can just use them over and over and over again. That would be huge. My last thing is that I like how calm and composed he is, but it's not to the point where he comes off as scared. He's calm and composed in press conferences, on the sideline, and he's just very chill, right? But he's confident in what he does. It's not like he is a head coach that comes off as calm, cool, and collected, but actually, really has no idea what he's doing. And I don't mean that as in, he's clueless, but I mean that as in, whenever he's asked about, hey, why didn't you go for it on fourth right there? Or why did you go for it on fourth right there? He's like, I don't. It's not like that. It's like, well, I went for it because ... and I didn't go for it because ... He has a consistent philosophy that he is confident in. That is what I'm trying to say. And that was the biggest gripe that I had about Brian Callahan was whenever I saw Brian Callahan in a press conference, he would always be like, whenever he would be asked, why didn't you go for it on fourth down here? He'd be like, I don't know. But with somebody like Kubiak, I feel like that if he were to be asked that question, he would give a definitive, solid answer. And that's what I like about him. Okay. the negatives. I question his leadership because even though his calmness and his coolness are positives of him and they could actually serve as qualities of a leader, like it could be easy to rally behind, that could also be pretty hard to rally behind at the same time because like you're not really fired up to play for him and you don't want to like play as hard as you can for him. Like that is the thing that I worry about the most. And I think that's why most people are really hesitant to a Klint Kubiak. That and, well, one other reason. But I worry about his leadership of a full locker room. I have no doubt about his ability to lead an offense, but both sides of the ball and special teams. And that's why I think that if he could assemble a good coaching staff, get a veteran defensive coordinator, and keep Bones as the special teams coordinator, then I would be a little bit more interested because he has a couple of other people that can help him bulk up in that leadership category. But I have no idea what he would form as a staff. But honestly, I would be interested in that because I feel like that we talked about how many places he's been. He probably has a decent amount of connections with how many places he's been, especially whenever he was a part of that San Francisco 49ers staff in 2023 and 2022. And he was a part of that, and he's a part of that Seahawks staff right now that also has some pretty good coaches. Like, if you can bring in, or heck, yeah, the Seahawks. Like, I'm sure that there are a ton of defensive minds on that staff that would do really good with us. But anyway, like, again, I worry about his leadership, even though I do think that is something that could get simmered down. It's something that I worry about. Okay, next thing I'll say is experience. I worry about this more with him than I do Shula, because while Shula is intensely innovative and he's really young, Kubiak is young, but he's not as intensely innovative as Chris Shula is. And unlike Chris Shula, where it seems like that he is consistently good every single game with a guy like Klint Kubiak. I remember hearing from also other Seahawks fans that he'll just have this one moment every game where you're just like, what the heck was he thinking, right? Why on earth did he decide to do that? Like, you're going for it on 4th and 1 and you bring up that play, or like that's the play that you run in this situation whenever the offense is rolling. Like, that is the type of stuff. And his run game hasn't been that great. Now, look, that may be just because Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet are kind of mediocre whenever it comes to running, and also the O-line isn't like amazing or anything, but still, that is something that really needs to be fixed with the Titans, and I don't want to take a gamble on that. So I do worry about his experience, but the thing that I worry about most of all, and honestly, I'm going to use this as a transition into the overall, the thing that probably won't get him hired is, again, that stinking last name, Kubiak. If his name was Clint Eastwood, no, that's a bad example. If his last name was like Clint West, right? It was that name. West as in West Coast. He had this exact same scheme, and he was doing just as well in Seattle, then I think that we would give him a fair shot. But again, it's an offensive mind. It's an offensive mind that has a famous last name that is known as a schematic nerd. Does that sound familiar at all to anybody? Like, look, he does have the similarities to Kyle Shanahan. I won't deny that. Everybody has talked about that. And if you want to do that, go look that up. A lot of other people have covered that. But you got to think about that he does have some similarities to Callahan. Now, I don't think that he would be as bad with the clock, but I worry about his ability to discipline a team, and I worry about his ability to separate himself from Gary Kubiak, which he has started to this season, and I think that is something worth respecting. But still, it's just that is the thing that I worry about in the back of my head. He could very easily be Kyle Shanahan. He could very easily end up being Brian Callahan. And honestly, I don't think there's an in-between. And that is why I would be fine with this hire. I would get the high ceiling, but I would also think in the back of my mind, why are we going for this head coach whenever he has such a high ceiling, but his floor is as low as Callahan's? And it gets to the point where you're just like, is he actually like worth taking a shot at, especially whenever this front office has their jobs on the line whenever it comes to this head coaching hire, right? Like, here's the thing. I think that this is 100% a better candidate for the Giants job. The Giants have that receiver that he can spam. They have a really good defense. They have a great quarterback of the future. Their O-line kicks tail, and they have just all of the things that you need. And if he gets one of those connections to come over and be a defensive coordinator for them, he gets that defense back on the right track. That is a team to watch out for. So, like, I think that he is a better fit for the Giants, and I'll be honest, if he goes to the Giants, I think that will be for the better. But again, I would be fine with this hire. Not as excited as I would be about Shula, but still probably would end up being more happy about him than I would be about just somebody else. I don't even know who else to say. Wes Phillips, I guess, the offensive coordinator for the Vikings. I wouldn't be happy about that. But anyway, that's it for this video. I'll have all of my socials, Instagram and Twitter, linked in the description. I will also have the article link to Music City Miracles, where you can see the article form of these videos in the comment section. It's that way you can see the article form of these videos whenever I release those, because those come out just a little bit earlier. So anyway, that's going to do it all for me. This has been a rundown of your Tennessee Titans head coaching search. I love y'all, and tighten up.